The GH5 was and is an incredible camera. This thing is a little over 3 years old and it still holds up to this day. I wanted to talk about how I shoot with the GH5, why I still think it has value in today's camera world, why it might not be perfect for every situation and why you might want to use something else, but just give you kind of a rundown of how I use the GH5 and where I think it fits for certain types of projects, because this is a pretty popular camera. Many people know about the GH5, they've used it, but it also gets maybe a bad reputation in some circles of not being full frame or being kind of outdated and old now. And so I just wanted to kind of shed a little light on this camera because I love so much about it. I still use it. In fact, I posted over on Instagram a picture from today. I was doing a shoot with the GH5. This was a pretty easy, pretty simple shoot, but that's why I think the GH5 makes so much sense for a lot of people, and maybe it might work for you if you haven't considered it, or maybe there's some lessons you can learn from all of this that might be relevant to whatever camera it is that you do use. So just use the GH5 today. I know it's old, it's outdated. Everyone's talking about the R5 and the A7S III and all the cool new stuff that's coming out. Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 4K and the 6K, or the Ursa Mini, but the GH5 still holds a special place in my heart, and I still love to shoot with it because it is a pretty incredible camera. When you think about what this offered, over 3 years ago when it first came out, the fact that a lot of these things are still not all that common, and even in a lot of cases are just now finally becoming more mainstream, becoming more ubiquitous on the other cameras, like from Sony, from Canon, etc. Let's start with one of my favorite features, and this is a small one, of course, but just getting the flip screen right. Granted, Canon has been doing that, but it's taken Sony how long to implement just a basic flip screen like this, so you can do selfies, so you can tilt it any which direction you want. There's so much to love about a flip screen like this. And even Panasonic themselves on the S1, they made the S1H with the valuable flip screen, and they charge more for it. The GH5 was the GH5. And I should mention the GH5S in all of this. I'll talk a little bit why I think I personally prefer the GH5, but the S probably is better in certain situations. However, for the example, let's just pretend they're kind of the same camera for the most part, although there are some minor differences. But yeah, the screen is fantastic. Also, the batteries on the GH5, this is all the small stuff. I'm getting to like some of the better stuff, but the batteries on the GH5, they last as long as you would want batteries to last, even shooting in the 4K modes. Get a good set of batteries. The batteries are cheap. They're not really expensive like, what I have to use for the Ursa Mini, where I have to get the Anton Bauer gold mount batteries. They're incredibly expensive and last about the same time. Granted, it's a much bigger camera and has different things that you would want to use it for, but the GH5 batteries, phenomenal. Let's talk about 10-bit 422 all-I. Yes, it's got it. 3.5 years ago, Panasonic delivered. Granted, it's micro four third, it's not full frame, but that's why with my setup, I have the speed booster. Of course you have the speed booster. If you have the GH5, you probably have the speed booster because everyone knows how great a speed booster is, being a focal reducer, giving you that wider field of view. So you get closer to Super 35 with the GH5 rather than having that 2x crop. You're only dealing with like a 1.5x crop. It's probably some factor or slightly different than exactly 1.5, but it's around there. And of course, pairing it with the Sigma 18 to 35. What a fantastic lens, just built for, almost it feels like it's made for this camera with the speed booster. This is like how I have the GH5 almost all the time because it's so versatile. If you have the 18 to 35 with the speed booster, you can get wide and medium shots, and you can go all the way to a 1.2 essentially with the speed booster on here. All electronically controlled from EF to micro four third, so no problems there. And then I typically almost always have some kind of variable ND on the front if I'm doing a run and gun situation. Today, as you saw in the photo, I'm outside, so I need NDs to keep my shutter angle, which is another thing the GH5 has that even the A7S III still won't implement. Shutter angle. What a simple feature to have in the software, in the firmware of your camera. Shutter angle. GH5 had it, GH4 had it way before then. Wonderful, helpful feature. Keep it at 180 degrees pretty much all the time, but you'll need an ND of some kind. Now, there isn't any built-in ND. Would that make this camera better? Of course, but there are adapters that have ND filters in it, and many times you can get away with a variable ND on the front if it is a run and gun situation. Let's talk about run and gun and why the GH5 is so awesome in that setup. This thing is so lightweight. I just compared it to the S1H from Panasonic, much bigger, much heavier. And even for a hybrid, to handhold the S1H all day long, like you can do with the GH5, it's almost like double, triple what feels like the weight in terms of exhaustion and wearing you down. The GH5, even with this, the 18 to 35 Sigma is a decently heavy lens. It's not the biggest, of course, but it's decent. You don't get tired running around with this thing. Oh, did I mention the internal stabilization? Yes, many other cameras have internal stabilization nowadays, but the GH5 internal stabilization is really, really good, and you can use it with the 18 to 35, no problem. And you can run and gun all day long, run around, hold the camera. Even if you get a little bit shaky at the end of the day because you're a little bit tired, it's really not a problem because you have internal stabilization, which the GH5S does not have. They removed that for the GH5S, which is why I would say in some situations it may be the better or worse choice depending on what your needs are. If you really, really need the low light, the GH5S probably has you covered there. But with the 18 to 35 and the speed booster, I'm really not ever struggling to have enough light. I mean, if you want to shoot in the pitch black, sure. But just this morning, I was up at 5 a.m. before the sunrise, filming right at that beautiful early morning dawn. Totally fine. Granted, I'm shooting at a 1.2, but I was able to do it. And I wasn't struggling with the GH5. Now, is the footage as pretty as something from the Ursa Mini? No, it's not. But a lot of times you don't need that extra horsepower. There's a lot of projects that are more run and gun. Maybe they're just going to YouTube. They're small, cheaper, more efficient type videos that aren't, full-blown feature films or short films or documentaries or music videos or commercials. And it's just video content for, YouTube or the web or like a homepage. The GH5 shines in these environments because you can film pretty much anything, anywhere, anytime, and you can get away with it and have really good video quality. There are many times where you might want to upgrade the GH5 with a rig, some kind of kit, kind of make it look all cool with a matte box and rails and extra screens and shoulder rig. You can do all that. Do you need to? No, you don't need to. Like with the Blackmagic Pocket cinema cameras, it's almost always recommended that you're going to have some kind of battery attachment because the batteries don't last all that long. You probably want some kind of screen because the screen itself doesn't flip. It's beautiful imagery. It's really great value for the price, but there's some inefficiencies with the camera as is. The great thing about the GH5 is everything is built in. The only thing you need to do is put a lens on it and a battery and a memory card and you're ready to go. You don't need anything else. Even if you're in a situation where you're outdoors and the screen you can't see, you have the viewfinder to look through and you can, hold it up to your face and kind of block some of the light that way. Is it the best viewfinder? No, the Sony ones are better, but does it work for most situations? Absolutely. And the price point, nowadays you can get the GH5, I think for like $1,000. It's $1,300 new, but you can probably find it used. You can find it refurbished, whatever you're looking for. It's a really, really affordable camera and still does all these great features that are just now coming to the forefront with things like the A7S III. Of course, that's full frame. Of course, it is 4K 120, probably better dynamic range. Who knows? We'll see. But, and the autofocus, I should say. The autofocus, yes, the autofocus is not that great on the GH5. But frankly, many times I'm not even using the autofocus. And if I do need it for like videos, for photos, let's say, and I want to use the 18 to 35, well, the tap to zoom in functionality on the touchscreen allows you to manual focus basically even better than autofocus might get certain times. How sometimes autofocus, you'll focus on what you want, but doesn't quite get it. It's a little off. You can manual focus right on the screen in real time, and it's a slightly slower than autofocus, but not by much once you get used to it. And then you're in a situation where you know exactly what you want in focus is in focus because you punch in, you zoom, you make sure it's there yourself. And you can do the same thing recording video. Now, you can't punch in while you're recording video. I wish that were a feature. That's nice on the Ursa Mini that you can do that. You can double tap on the screen and check your focus while you're recording, but you can't do that in GH5. One minor little gripe. But overall, for $1,000, let's say, maybe a little bit more for the lens and the speed booster, right? But these are things that can last you for other camera systems too as well. Like a speed booster will probably, hopefully work on a inevitable GH6. This speed booster is from the GH4 days, so that was an easy, addition. It didn't really cost me anything because I already had it. Same thing with 18 to 35. The things outside of the camera will last you a lot longer typically. And I have a fun little pistol grip on here. That's a new addition. You don't need that, but I kind of like just being able to hold with two hands, just another kind of anchor point. So if you are running gunning and you need to move, trade hands real quick, it's a tiny little thing. I mean, it's like 10 bucks. They're really cheap. It's basically nothing. And you don't have to do it if you don't want to. It's a recent addition I've made. And like I said, you can rig it out if you want to, if you want to look professional. Like if you want to look like the GH5 is maybe more in the league of an Ursa Mini or a Red or an Alexa, of course you can rig it out. But how many times do you not want to set up all that extra junk just for recording maybe a YouTube video, a vlog, something that you don't need, there's no client there, so there's no one to impress. It's just you creating content. That's where I think the GH5 shines. And in fact, where hybrids shine, a lot of people want to talk about these cameras like they're photography cameras only. And if you want a real video camera, then you got to go buy something really expensive that's, got all those features that you want. Like, oh, no recording limits. Well, the GH5 has no recording limits. Does that make it a real video camera? Shutter angle, is it a real video camera because of shutter angle? 10-bit 422. For a while it was like, oh, if you want that, buy a real video camera. GH5 has had that. You don't need any kind of external recorder to do it. If you want to do high frame rate, of course you have 4K 60, which is pretty slow for the most part. It's definitely going to stabilize your footage a little bit. It's not super slow-mo like you can get with a Phantom. And if you need 120, you can drop down to 1080 if you need to. Granted, it's not the best, but we're just now getting 4K 120 in the full frame cameras, and that's becoming a little bit more of a mainstream thing. Meanwhile, 1080 120 has been working, for the past 3 or 4 years or so. And 4K 60 in a body like this size and style, and granted that mode is 8-bit, so it's not the best, but there's no extra crop or anything, and stabilization still works. You can do almost any type of shoot with the GH5, and that's why I think it's so fantastic, is because you can upgrade it if you want to, but you don't have to. A lot of these cameras, they're talking about the R5 now, and it overheats. Oh, but just get a Ninja 5 and take the cards out, and it won't overheat on you. You can record 4K 30 HQ mode. Well, okay, but then you have to have this external monitor every single shoot you want to do that. Same thing with the Sony cameras for the longest time. Oh, they're 8-bit internal, but you can do 10-bit, you can do 4K, you can do some of these things externally. And you have to have the monitor every single time you want to do that. The beauty, I think, of the GH5 is that it is the true hybrid in the sense that everything you want is built in. There is no extra stuff that you need to add to get the features you want, aside from 10-bit 60 frames a second if you do want that externally. But you can still do 4K 60 internally, albeit only in 8-bit mode. So there are a few minor setbacks, but I honestly haven't been in any situation where the GH5 hasn't been kind of up to speed. Granted, things will look better, right? If you compare it to a Red or an Alexa or even the Ursa Mini Pro, it's gonna kind of pale in comparison in terms of the ultimate image quality if that's your goal. If your goal is absolute image quality, then all the expensive ways to make that happen, even the kind of more affordable ways to make that happen. But if you want efficiency and simplicity and just ease of use and flexibility, that's where I think the GH5 shines. Even this, microphone that I have on top of here just to capture just ambient sound. I'd recommend when you get these, don't get the ones with the batteries built in. They maybe sound a little bit better, but you're probably not even relying on that audio all that much anyway. It's probably just for reference or like my main recording got deleted or corrupted and thankfully I have a backup. This doesn't have any internal batteries, so I never have to bring extra batteries or worry about the microphone dying on me as you do with some of the other kind of shotgun top-mounted systems, or you have to have, some extra power system hooked up to it. Just plug it right in, and it's just a microphone, and it works, and it sounds great. And even these are really, really cheap as well. So there's not enough I can't say enough about the GH5 because it is so incredible for what it does and what it is and what it's supposed to be, and it's 3.5 years old. This is it was a no-brainer at the time for me, and I've used it for so many shoots. And for photography, you got 20 megapixels, you've got all the same stabilization features, you got autofocus that works much better in photography mode than it does in video mode. Just some simple things, a variable ND for if you're outside running gun, a microphone, maybe a pistol grip if you want it, but don't even need it. I mean, there's times where people put these things on, Ronins and gimbals and all sorts of stabilization that many times you might not even need, depending on the shot. Now, if you're doing full-on movement and tracking and all that stuff, yeah, it's going to be smoother and it's going to be better. But with the internal stabilization, there's a lot of handheld stuff that you can get that's perfectly smooth. That would be a challenge or a chore on other cameras. Even the Ursa Mini Pro or the Pocket Cinema cameras for that matter, there's no internal stabilization. You might have lens stabilization, but that's not nearly as good as some like dual. If you don't have the Sigma 18-35 and you do some native lens that has stabilization as well, like you're golden in most situations. And you can do, kind of faux slider shots and jib shots and follow shots that look like a gimbal, especially with additional stabilization that you can add in post-production if you really, 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 really need it. There's so much you can do with a camera that's $1,000. And so when I complain about, or I nitpick things about the Canon R5 and how it's not, up to speed, and people say, it's just for photography. It's like, you're spending $4,000. It should be able to do at least some of these features. And granted, I know it's way more megapixels and it's full frame and all the excuses. I get it. But I think there's a beauty to the simplicity of what Panasonic did with the Lumix GH5 in just giving you all the features right in the camera. And I still think to this day, with the Vlog upgrade, recording 10-bit, if that's what you want for maximum dynamic range, it still has value compared to other cameras. Will it be outdated? I'm sure it will eventually, probably by a GH6 or something similar. I mean, even the S1H is kind of like a bigger version of the GH5 in a lot of ways. It's taking that video hybrid mindset and just maximizing it on their full frame camera. But in terms of frame rates, the S1H isn't doing 4K 120. It's giving you a little bit better 4K 60 at 10-bit. It's giving you 6K, which is a significant upgrade from 4K. But it's not blowing the GH5 out of the water because it's a bigger sensor size, twice as big, in fact. But you can kind of get there with the speed booster again on the GH5. There's so much that like this camera is not limited. If anything, it's one of the few cameras that feels unlimited in its potential and its capability. Again, I'm not saying it's the best camera ever invented. If you have something that's really high production value, really premium, and you have a crew and you've got, an AC and you've got all this stuff around you, like beautiful cinema lenses and all this stuff, yes, go all out, spend the money. But don't forget how sometimes some shoots, you don't need all that. You can get by with so much less. And it actually is all kind of right here for a little over $1,000 in 2020. So if you didn't buy it when it first came out, I'm not saying you should buy it now. Maybe probably wait for the GH6. But if you're in a situation where like, wow, I just wish shooting videos was more easy, more fun, more intuitive. Because I'll tell you what, the Ursa Mini, I'm not taking that out for fun. It's not a fun camera to carry with you on vacation or just to take out to a farmer's market on the weekend. It's a chore. It's a burden because it needs so much stuff. The batteries are bigger and heavier. The lenses, if you're doing the Cineprimes, are super, super heavy. You got to do the shoulder rig, and the cards are more expensive. If you're doing CFast, granted, it does do SD as well. And there are more features with the Ursa Mini Pro. The built-in ND is very, very helpful. But it's like a cinema camera for cinema purposes, which makes sense on certain shoots when you need that higher production value. You got bigger budgets. But there's many, many times where, the bare minimum of a GH5 is more than adequate. So don't ever forget, as much as we talk about new cameras and how great stuff is, even if a GH4 still has value in a lot of ways. I probably would definitely pick the GH5 over the GH4, but I mean, that camera's over 6 years old now. So there's so much stuff that, even though it's not the latest and greatest, still has so much value. And I don't want to sell it short in the fact that we're just 3.5, 4 years away from when this thing first came out, and we're finally kind of catching up with more like the mainstream cameras. And it makes me honestly excited for the GH6 and what the potential is there. I just shot with the S1H, and it's a beautiful camera, full frame. It's fantastic, the dynamic range and just beautiful, beautiful imagery. But the GH5 isn't that far behind it when you consider how affordable it is and how old it is in today's day and age. If you feel bad about owning a GH5 or a GH5S, don't. They're incredible cameras that can do incredible things and still have so much value. And one of the things I turn to in my kit, because there's really nothing else at this point that just does so much right out of the box, and you can just run and gun and get so much great content so quickly and efficiently. And like I said, it's fun. It makes filming content so easy and simple that you forget about all the technicals and, oh, did I bring the right, adapters and cables to hook up these external monitors? And oh my goodness, I forgot my rails, so now I can't do my matte box and my follow focus. And oh no, this ring doesn't fit my lens, and what am I gonna do? All of that stuff is the nice premium trappings that you kind of can throw on things and make them nicer, a little bit more easy to use in certain situations, to frankly make your camera look cooler for Instagram or for a client. Like, that's all fair. I do it myself too if I need to impress somebody or just feel like kind of have the need for it on a particular shoot. But there are many times where you don't, and you can have a lot of fun with a camera like the GH5. Maybe it's not the GH5, maybe it's a different one. Maybe it's a Fuji or an Olympus or a Sony for that matter. There's so much power with this style of shooting. It kind of unlocks the ability, from my perspective, to film basically nonstop all day, never getting tired, and having perfect stabilization almost always. You can run around, follow, get whatever you want, recording nonstop. It unlocks a lot of opportunities that just weren't a thing 5-10 years ago in terms of filmmaking potential and creativity of what you're able to achieve. I mean, if you think, the one take shot in movies is really cool and really impressive, well, yeah, because it is when it's, those big budgets and stuff, but you can basically do one take all day on the GH5. I mean, dual card slots, so you can just hot swap as you go if you need to. You could record continuously all day on this, just switching cards. Granted, you probably would run out of battery at a certain point, but of course you could always hook up some external battery if you really needed. So there's so much that this camera offers, as well as many cameras in its class. I think that's why I get maybe a little disappointed by the people who just write off hybrids as like, well, that's mainly for photography. Just go get a video camera. It's like, don't you see the power and the potential of something like this? How much it can do if it has the flip screen, if it has all these features that were standardized by Panasonic 3.5 years ago. It just makes you think and appreciate the great tools we have at our disposal to do new creative things pretty much every single day.